The ocean floor off the coast of New England holds a shattered monument to the price of American ambition. It is April 1963, and the cold waters of the Atlantic are about to swallow the most advanced machine ever built by human hands. This silent catastrophe will not just claim 129 lives, it will rewrite the rules of survival for every sailor who dares to go beneath the waves. To understand the tragedy of the USS Thresher, one must first understand the world that demanded her creation. The early 1960s is a time of terrifying technological acceleration. The United States and the Soviet Union are locked in a stare-down that spans from the launch pads of Cape Canaveral to the divided streets of Berlin. But the most dangerous front of the Cold War is not in the sky or on land. It is hidden in the dark, crushing depths of the world's oceans. For nearly a decade, American naval superiority has rested on a comfortable assumption. Soviet submarines are numerous, but they are loud and relatively crude. They are diesel-electric boats that must surface to charge their batteries, or noisy first-generation nuclear vessels that can be heard miles away. The United States Navy believes it owns the undersea domain, but intelligence reports arriving at the Pentagon begin to paint a different picture. The Soviets are learning. They are building faster, deeper diving submarines. They are closing the gap. The strategic balance is shifting, and the United States needs a response that is not just an improvement, but a revolution. The Navy does not want a slightly better submarine. They want a predator that can dominate the ocean for the next 20 years. They want a ship that can hear a Soviet submarine before it even leaves its harbor, a ship that can dive deeper than any torpedo can follow, and a ship that is so quiet it becomes a hole in the water. The answer to this challenge is the Thresher-class. The lead ship, USS Thresher, SSN 593, is laid down at the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard in Kittery, Maine, on May 28, 1958. From the moment the first keel plate is welded, it is clear that this is a different breed of animal. Previous nuclear submarines, like the Nautilus and the Skipjack, were essentially experiments in propulsion or hull form. The Thresher is a weapon system designed for total hunter-killer dominance. The design philosophy is radical. For the first time, speed is secondary to silence and detection. The engineers move the torpedo tubes from the bow to the midships. This frees up the entire nose of the submarine for a massive sonar sphere, the BQQ-2. It is an acoustic eye of unprecedented power, capable of detecting enemy contacts at ranges that were previously considered impossible. To carry this sensor and the crew into the abyss, the hull is constructed from a new high-yield alloy known as HY-80 steel. This material is incredibly tough, designed to withstand pressures that would crush a standard World War II submarine like a soda can. The test depth is officially classified, but everyone in the shipyard knows that Thresher is built to go deeper than anyone has ever gone before, likely exceeding 1,300 feet. As the workers at Portsmouth toil through the New England winters, they are driven by a fierce sense of pride. Portsmouth is the oldest naval shipyard in the country. The men building the Thresher are often second- or third-generation shipwrights. They are welding the future. The hull sections are thick, the ribs are massive, and the complexity of the internal piping is staggering. The Thresher is designed to be the quietest nuclear submarine in the world. Every piece of machinery, from the massive turbines to the smallest pumps, is mounted on sound rafts. These rafts are suspended from the hull by rubber mounts, isolating the vibration of the engines from the steel skin of the ship. In theory, this means the Thresher can move through the water without radiating noise into the ocean. She is a ghost. On July 9, 1960, the USS Thresher slides down the ways into the Piscataqua River. The launch is a moment of national celebration. Mrs. Mary B. Warder, wife of the skipper of the famous sub-USS Seawolf, smashes the champagne bottle. The crowd cheers. The Navy brass beams with confidence. They believe they have just launched the invincible shield of the free world. But beneath the polished exterior and the patriotic speeches, the Thresher is an incredibly complex labyrinth of pipes, valves, and wires. She contains over 3,000 separate silver-brazed joints in her seawater systems alone. These joints connect the pipes that bring high-pressure ocean water into the ship to cool the reactor and auxiliary systems. At test depth, the water inside those pipes will exert pressure of hundreds of pounds per square inch. A failure in a pipe at that depth would be like a bomb going off inside the hull. The complexity of the ship creates a grueling schedule for the crew and the builders. The fitting-out process is a race against time. The Navy needs this ship in the fleet. The Soviet threat is growing every day. There is immense pressure to cut ribbons, pass tests, and get the vessel operational. Commander Dean L. Axine takes command of the Blue Crew. He is an experienced officer, tasked with turning this technological marvel into a fighting ship. The early sea trials are a mix of triumph and troubleshooting. The Thresher is fast, she is quiet, and her sonar is spectacular, but she is also plagued by the teething troubles of a prototype. Hydraulic lines leak, electrical systems short out. The air conditioning struggles to keep up with the heat generated by the massive electronics suite. This is considered normal for a first-in-class vessel. The crew works 18-hour days to chase down the gremlins. They are the best of the best, hand-picked men who represent the elite of the submarine force. They trust their ship, and they trust their training. In 1961 and 1962, the Thresher conducts extensive shock trials. The Navy detonates explosives near the submerged submarine to test her hull integrity. She survives, but the violence of the tests rattles the ship to her core. Equipment breaks, gauges crack, and the crew is tossed about. After the trials, she returns to the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard for a 9-month overhaul. The goal of this maintenance period is to repair the damage from the shock tests and upgrade her systems. It is a massive undertaking. The workers swarm over the hull again. They inspect the silver-brazed joints, but not all of them. The sheer number of connections makes a 100% inspection using the latest ultrasonic techniques impossible within the allotted schedule. Instead, they use a statistical sampling method. They check a percentage of the joints and assume that if those are good, the rest are good. It is a decision born of necessity and confidence. The shipyard has built hundreds of submarines. They know their trade. They believe that their workmanship is sound. As the overhaul nears completion in the spring of 1963, a new commanding officer takes the helm. Lieutenant Commander John Wesley Harvey is a rising star in the Navy. He is handsome, charismatic, and technically brilliant. He served on the USS Nautilus during her historic voyage under the North Pole. He was hand-picked by Admiral Hyman Rickover, the father of the nuclear navy, to interview for the command. Harvey is the kind of officer the Navy puts on recruiting posters. He inherits a crew that is eager to get back to sea. The overhaul has been long and tedious. The sailors are tired of the shipyard noise, the dirt, and the endless drills in port. They want to do what they signed up for, slip the lines, dive deep, and disappear. Among the 129 men aboard are not just the crew, but also civilian experts. There are engineers from the shipyard, technicians from the sonar contractors, and observers from the Naval Ordnance Laboratory. They are there to monitor the complex systems during the upcoming sea trials. They are fathers, husbands, and sons. They are the human intellectual capital of the Cold War, the minds that make the machines work. By April 1963, the Thresher looks ready. Her hull is freshly painted, her reactor is fueled, her provisions are loaded. She is the most powerful attack submarine on Earth. She carries the hopes of the Navy and the security of the nation in her missile tubes and torpedo racks. But as she prepares to leave Portsmouth, there are subtle warning signs that not everything is perfect. The complexity of the high-pressure air system, the system used to blow the ballast tanks and bring the ship to the surface in an emergency, is a concern for some engineers. The air dryers, designed to remove moisture from the compressed air, are finicky. If moisture freezes in the valves during a rapid expansion of air, the system could clog. In the rush of the schedule, these concerns are noted but not seen as showstoppers. The culture of the time is one of can-do optimism. Americans are going to the moon. They are splitting the atom. They believe that technology can solve any problem. The idea that a simple formation of ice or a bad weld could doom a machine worth millions of dollars seems abstract, almost impossible. On April 9, 1963, the lines are singled up. The tugboats move into position. The families of the crew gather on the pier to wave goodbye. It is a grey, blustery spring day in New England. The wind whips the trench coats of the wives and mothers. Children hold signs. There is the usual mix of sadness and pride that accompanies every deployment. Commander Harvey stands on the bridge, looking down at the activity. He waves to his wife, Irene, and their 2 young sons. He exudes confidence. He knows his ship. He knows his mission. The plan is standard. Sail out to the deep water east of Cape Cod, conduct a series of shallow dives to check the systems, and then, on the following morning, proceed to the test depth. It is a routine post-overhaul shakedown. They have done it before. They expect to be back in port within a few days. As the Thresher moves away from the pier, the gap of water between the steel hull and the safety of the land widens. The sleek, black shape of the submarine cuts through the chop of the Piscataqua River, heading for the open Atlantic. She passes the lighthouse, passes the breakwater, and enters the swell of the ocean. To the observers on the shore, she looks magnificent, a pinnacle of engineering, a guarantor of peace. But as she slips beneath the horizon, she is carrying invisible flaws in her veins. The silver brazing on her pipes, the moisture in her airlines, the immense pressure of the expectations placed upon her, all of these are traveling with her into the deep. The stage is set. The actors are in place. The USS Thresher is steaming toward a rendezvous with a destiny that will shake the foundations of the United States Navy. The machine of tomorrow is about to face the unforgiving reality of the abyss. As the sun rises over the North Atlantic on the morning of April 10, 1963, the ocean presents a deceptive face of calm. The wind has picked up slightly, whipping the gray swells into whitecaps, but the visibility is good. 220 miles east of Cape Cod, the rescue ship USS Skylark rolls gently in the sea. She's a World War II-era vessel, a converted fleet tug designed for a different age of warfare. Her hull is rusted in places, her engines are loud, and her technology is simple. She is the only lifeline for the machine operating beneath her. Far below the keel of the Skylark, the USS Thresher is entering a world of eternal twilight. The submarine has spent the night conducting shallow dives, checking seals and instruments. The crew has worked through the checklists with the practiced efficiency of men who know their lives depend on the details. The coffee pots in the galley are draining fast. The air in the boat is cool and dry, conditioned by the massive scrubbers to remove the humidity of 129 breathing humans. At 7:47 a.m., Lieutenant Commander John Harvey orders the Thresher to commence her descent to test depth. This is the main event. This is the reason they have left the safety of the harbor. The test depth is the maximum depth at which the submarine is certified to operate during peacetime. It is a limit calculated by engineers to provide a safety margin before the hull begins to yield. On the Thresher, this depth is classified, but it is roughly 1,300 feet. To a layman, 1,300 feet is a number. To a submariner, it is a physical weight. At that depth, the ocean exerts a pressure of nearly 600 pounds on every single square inch of the hull. The steel skin of the submarine will compress. The diameter of the boat will actually shrink by inches. The stringers and ribs will groan as they take the load. It is a violent, crushing hug that never relaxes. On the bridge of the Skylark, Lieutenant Commander Hecker, the captain of the surface ship, listens to the underwater telephone. The device, known as the UQC or Gertrude, is a sonar-based communication system. It transmits voice data through the water using sound waves. The quality is notoriously poor. The voices sound tinny, distant, and distorted, as if coming from the bottom of a deep well. Proceeding to test depth, Harvey's voice crackles through the speaker. The Skylark acknowledges. The dance begins. The Thresher descends in increments, pausing every few hundred feet to check for leaks. At 400 feet, the crew inspects the sea valves. All secure. At 600 feet, the pressure builds. The hull pops and creaks, the sounds echoing through the silent ship. This is normal. The metal is settling. At 800 feet, the submarine is now deeper than light can penetrate. Outside the hole, there is only absolute blackness. Inside, the fluorescent lights hum, and the reactor team monitors the flow of coolant. The nuclear fire in the belly of the ship is driving the turbines, pushing the vessel downward in a slow, controlled spiral. At 8:35 a.m., the Thresher reaches 1,000 feet. She is now operating in a realm that few machines have ever visited. The pressure is immense. The silver brazed joints in the seawater systems are holding back the ocean. The pumps are humming. At 8:53 a.m., the Thresher approaches her test depth. The descent slows. The ship levels off. She is now hovering in the abyss, suspended by buoyancy and power. The crew conducts a comprehensive leak check. Men move through the compartments with flashlights, inspecting the bilges, the valves, and the hydraulic lines. Everything appears normal. The Thresher is a triumph of engineering. She is sitting at the bottom of her operational envelope, defying the crushing weight of the Atlantic. Then, at 9:13 a.m., the rhythm of the morning breaks. On the bridge of the Skylark, the UQC speaker crackles to life. The transmission is garbled, fighting through layers of thermal distortion and static. But the words that cut through are chilling in their professional understatement. Have positive up angle, attempting to blow. The officers on the Skylark exchange glances. Attempting to blow means the Thresher is trying to empty her ballast tanks. This is the standard procedure for surfacing. Submarines use high-pressure air stored in massive banks of bottles to force the water out of the ballast tanks, making the ship lighter than the surrounding ocean so it rises to the surface. But the phrase, attempting to blow, implies a struggle. Usually, a submarine simply blows ballast. You don't attempt it unless something is resisting you. And then, a sound. Through the UQC, the Skylark crew hears the distinct, high-pitched hiss of rushing air. It is the sound of the emergency blow system activating. The high-pressure air is screaming into the ballast tanks, fighting to push the water out against 600 pounds per square inch of ocean pressure. But something is wrong. The sound is not the continuous roar of a successful blow. It is interrupted. It sounds like air rushing through a restricted pipe, or perhaps air that is failing to move the water. Inside the Thresher, the situation has spiraled from routine to catastrophic in seconds. The sequence of events that is likely unfolding, though no one on the surface knows it yet, begins in the engine room. A pipe, likely a saltwater piping joint in a seawater system, has failed. The silver brazing, perhaps weakened by the shock trials or flawed from the start, gives way. A jet of high-pressure water, moving with the force of a cutting torch, blasts into the engine room. It is a fog of atomized seawater, instantly shorting out electrical panels. The spray hits the main coolant pumps or the electrical bus that powers them. The reactor safety systems detect a fluctuation. In a split second, the automatic scram sequence initiates. The control rods slam into the reactor core. The nuclear reaction stops. The steam production ceases. The Thresher loses propulsion. Without the screw turning, the submarine loses the hydrodynamic lift that helps keep her depth stable. She's now heavy. She is taking on water from the leak, getting heavier by the second. She begins to sink. Commander Harvey, realizing the propulsion is gone, orders the emergency blow. Emergency main ballast tank blow. The chief of the watch throws the levers. The high-pressure air rushes from the bottles toward the ballast tanks. It passes through the reducers and the intricate maze of piping. But as the air expands rapidly from thousands of pounds of pressure down to the tank pressure, it cools instantly. The moisture in the air, the moisture that the dryers failed to remove, freezes. Ice forms in the strainers and the valves. Ideally, the air should roar into the tanks, displacing the water and rocketing the ship to the surface. Instead, the ice chokes the flow. The blow is weak. It lasts for only a few seconds before the pipes clog. The hiss dies away. The thresher is now a dead weight falling through the water column. She is at test depth and she is sinking deeper. She is passing 1,300 feet. 1,400 feet. The hull groans louder now. The steel is approaching its yield point. On the Skylark, the silence from the speaker is agonizing. Lieutenant Commander Hecker grabs the microphone. "Are you in control? Thresher, are you in control?" Silence. Then, at 9:16 a.m., a final garbled transmission comes through. It is broken, fragmented by the physics of the water. The listeners on the Skylark strain to hear. They catch only snippets. Exceeding test depth. Then the distinct number, 900. It is not a depth. The thresher is far deeper than 900 feet. It is likely a reference to the event number, or perhaps a truncated report of the depth passing 1,900. No one is sure. Then, at 9:18 a.m., the Skylark's sonar operators hear a sound that they will never forget. It is not a voice. It is a low-frequency, high-energy event. It sounds like a dull thud, followed by the tearing of metal. It is the sound of a compartment collapsing. At a depth of approximately 2,400 feet, the calculated collapse depth of the hull, the ocean finally wins. The pressure hull of the USS Thresher fails. It happens faster than the human nervous system can process pain. In less than 1/10 of a second, the hull implodes. The air inside the ship is compressed instantly, turning into a diesel engine piston of fire. The water rushes in at supersonic speed. The 129 men on board do not drown. They do not suffocate. They are simply extinguished. The ship is shredded into thousands of pieces of debris, raining down toward the ocean floor, which lies another 6,000 feet below. On the surface, the Skylark rocks gently in the swell. The crew waits. They call out again. "Gertrude, check. Thresher, acknowledge." Nothing. Minutes drag into hours. The captain of the Skylark begins to realize the unthinkable has happened. He orders lookouts to scan the water. They are looking for a surfacing submarine. They are looking for an emergency buoy. They are looking for flares. By the afternoon, other ships are converging on the scene. Destroyers and aircraft are dispatched from the mainland. The hope is that the Thresher is merely suffering a communications failure, sitting on the bottom or drifting deep, waiting for help. But as the sun begins to set, the lookouts on the Skylark spot something. Floating on the gray surface of the Atlantic, bobbing in the chop, are small items. Bits of cork, yellow rubber gloves, pieces of plastic shielding, and an oil slick. A boat is lowered to recover the debris. A sailor leans over the gunwale and hooks a piece of cork from the water. It is insulation, the kind used to line the interior of a submarine's hull. The reality settles over the rescue fleet like a shroud. There is no submarine to rescue. The Thresher is gone. The most advanced weapon system in the American arsenal, the pride of the Portsmouth shipyard, the home of 129 men, has been reduced to a field of scrap metal scattered across the bottom of the ocean. The news travels fast. In Washington, the chief of naval operations is pulled from a meeting. In the White House, President Kennedy is briefed, but the hardest blows land in the living rooms of Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and Groton, Connecticut. Wives who had kissed their husbands goodbye just 24 hours earlier are waiting for the phone to ring. They are listening to the radio. Rumors are flying. Submarine missing. Communications lost. When the official Navy sedans begin to pull into the driveways, the waiting ends and the morning begins. The tragedy of the Thresher is no longer a military secret or an engineering failure. It is a human catastrophe. The ocean has claimed the machine of tomorrow, and now the Navy must ask the question that will haunt it for decades. Why? The Atlantic Ocean does not negotiate physics. At 9:18 a.m. on April 10, 1963, the laws of thermodynamics and fluid dynamics converged to execute a death sentence on 129 men. It was not enemy action or a collision that killed the USS Thresher, but a silent, cascading chain of microscopic industrial failures. As the debris settles on the ocean floor, 8,400 feet below the surface, the silence returns. But on the surface, the noise is just beginning. The Navy launches the most extensive search operation in its history, driven by a desperate need to understand how the most advanced vessel in the fleet could simply vanish. To understand the disaster, investigators have to reconstruct the final minutes of the Thresher using only the fragmented audio recorded by the USS Skylark and the blueprints of the submarine. What emerges from the inquiry is a terrifying sequence of events, a domino effect where safety systems designed to protect the ship actually conspired to doom it. The catastrophe almost certainly began with a failure of the smallest order, a silver brazed joint. The Thresher was a labyrinth of pipes. To save weight and space, the Navy used a technique called silver brazing to join the pipes carrying high-pressure seawater. It is a process similar to soldering, where a silver alloy is melted to bond two pieces of metal. When done correctly, the bond is stronger than the pipe itself. When done poorly, it is a ticking time bomb. During the ship's construction, ultrasonic testing was a new technology. It was slow and expensive. Consequently, thousands of these joints were inspected only visually or by tapping them with a hammer to hear if they rang true. The inquiry would later reveal that up to 14% of the joints tested on other submarines of the same class were substandard. It is highly probable that as the Thresher reached maximum depth, the immense pressure of the ocean, nearly 45 tons per square foot, caused one of these joints in the engine room to shear. The result was not a trickle. It was a laser beam of water. A pipe failure at test depth injects water into the hull with the force of an explosion. The stream would have been powerful enough to cut through wiring insulation and smash gauges. But the immediate danger wasn't the flooding itself. It was what the water touched. The spray likely hit the main electrical bus boards. These panels controlled the power to the reactor's coolant pumps. As the salt water shorted the circuits, the pumps tripped offline. This triggered the second domino, the reactor scram. Nuclear reactors are designed with fail-safe mechanisms. If the flow of coolant stops, the reactor automatically shuts down to prevent a meltdown. It is a safety feature that works perfectly. On the Thresher, the safety system did exactly what it was designed to do. It detected the pump failure and slammed the control rods into the core. The nuclear reaction stopped instantly. But in a submarine at deep depth, a reactor scram is a crisis. When the reactor stops, steam production stops. When steam stops, the turbines spin down. The propeller stops turning. The Thresher relied on speed to maintain depth. Like an airplane, a submarine uses the flow of water over its planes to generate lift. Without propulsion, the Thresher was just a heavy steel tube. She began to slide backward, sinking deeper into the crushing dark. The crew, led by Commander Harvey, would have reacted instantly. They were trained for this. The procedure was clear: switch to battery power, restart the reactor, and blow the ballast tanks to surface. But restarting a pressurized water reactor takes time. It is a complex process of pulling rods and balancing temperatures. It can take 10 to 15 minutes. The Thresher didn't have minutes. She had seconds. Harvey played his last card. He ordered the emergency blow. This was the dead man's switch. The ability to inject massive amounts of high-pressure air into the ballast tanks to displace the water and make the ship cork to the surface. This is where the third and final failure occurred. The high-pressure air system on the Thresher pushed air through a complex maze of pipes and valves. As the air rushed from the storage bottles at 4,000 pounds per square inch into the lower pressure environment of the pipes, it expanded rapidly. Physics dictates that rapidly expanding gas cools down. This is the Joule-Thomson effect. The temperature inside the pipes plummeted in milliseconds, dropping far below freezing. The air inside the system was supposed to be dry, but the air dryers on the Thresher were notoriously unreliable. There was moisture in the lines. As the pipes froze, that moisture turned into ice. Within seconds, ice crystals formed on the mesh strainers protecting the valves. The ice accumulated instantly, forming a plug. The roar of the air, which should have saved the ship, was choked off. The hiss heard by the Skylark stopped because the pipes were clogged with ice. The Thresher was now heavy with flooding, without propulsion, and unable to blow her ballast. She was terminal. She continued to sink, sliding past her test depth. The hull groaned as it compressed. At approximately 9:18 a.m., she passed crush depth, likely around 2,400 feet. The hull collapsed inward at a speed of supersonic violence. The implosion occurred in less than 50 milliseconds. It was faster than the human brain can process a nerve impulse. The men on board never felt the water. They were gone before they knew they were dead. On the surface, the realization of the tragedy was slow and agonizing. The Navy had lost contact, but finding a submarine in the open Atlantic is like finding a needle in a haystack. Only the haystack is underwater and pitch black. The depth was the enemy. At 8,400 feet, the bottom of the Atlantic is an alien world. The pressure is 3,800 pounds per square inch. Sunlight does not exist there. Standard divers cannot reach it. Even most submarines cannot reach it. The Navy turned to the only tools it had: oceanographic research ships and a strange, ungainly vessel called the Trieste. The Trieste was a bathyscaphe, a deep-diving research submersible that looked more like a blimp than a submarine. It consisted of a heavy steel sphere for the crew suspended beneath a massive float filled with gasoline. It was slow, difficult to maneuver, and terrifying to operate, but it was the only vehicle capable of taking humans to the bottom of the abyss. Before the Trieste could dive, the search teams had to narrow down the location. The ship USS Mizar deployed a fish, a camera sled towed on a miles-long cable just above the ocean floor. For weeks, the Mizar trod the dark waters, snapping thousands of grainy black and white photos of the mud. It was a grueling process. The Atlantic weather fought them, the cables snapped, the cameras failed. But they kept looking. In June 1963, the cameras finally saw something. It wasn't a hull. It wasn't the conning tower standing proud in the silt. It was a field of debris. The photos showed twisted piping, sheets of metal torn like paper, and pieces of equipment scattered across thousands of yards of the seafloor. The violence of the implosion had shredded the Thresher. There was no ship to raise. There were only fragments. In August, the Trieste arrived to confirm the find. Lieutenant Don Walsh, a legendary oceanographer, and his team descended into the dark. Peering through the thick plexiglass viewport, they saw the graveyard of the Thresher. They spotted a sonar dome. They saw an air bottle. And then they saw something that removed all doubt. Lying in the silt was a piece of pipe marked with the numbers 593, the whole number of the Thresher. They also found a boot, a yellow rubber glove, a book. The site was designated a grave. The Trieste recovered a few small pieces of copper tubing to bring back for analysis, but the rest was left where it lay. The photos brought back by the Trieste confirmed the total destruction of the vessel. The implosion had been absolute. The discovery of the wreckage shifted the focus from rescue to investigation. The debris told a story of immense force. The way the metal was twisted confirmed that the pressure hull had failed catastrophically. Back in Portsmouth, the inquiry was already underway. A naval court of inquiry, headed by Vice Admiral Bernard Austin, began calling witnesses. They interviewed the shipyard workers. They interviewed the design engineers. They interviewed the crew of the Skylark. The testimony was damning. Workers admitted that the pressure to meet schedules often led to shortcuts. Inspectors revealed that they had signed off on joints they hadn't fully tested. The air dryer problems were well known, but had been dismissed as a nuisance rather than a fatal flaw. The picture that emerged was not of a single mistake, but of a systemic failure. The Navy had pushed the boundaries of technology without bringing its quality control standards along for the ride. They had built a Ferrari, but maintained it like a Model T. The most chilling revelation came from the analysis of the silver-brazed joints. During the inquiry, investigators tested similar joints from other submarines. They found that in simulated deep-dive conditions, the failure rate was terrifyingly high. The Thresher had gone to sea with thousands of potential leak points, any one of which could have killed her. The loss of the Thresher was a wake-up call written in blood. The Cold War urgency that had driven the program had also blinded it to the risks. The Navy had assumed that because they were the best in the world, they were immune to failure. The Atlantic Ocean had proven them wrong. As the summer of 1963 turned to autumn, the families of the 129 men began to receive the final death certificates. There would be no bodies to bury. The Thresher was their tomb. But the questions raised by her loss were too loud to ignore. The Navy had to change, or it would lose more ships. The investigation was closing, but the real work was just beginning. The legacy of the Thresher would not be the debris field on the bottom of the ocean. It would be the rigorous, almost fanatical devotion to safety that would rise from the ashes of the disaster. The Thresher had died, but in her death, she was about to save thousands of future submariners. As the weeks drift by in the spring of 1963, the reality of the loss begins to settle over the naval communities of New England like a heavy, gray fog. The frantic energy of the search operation fades, replaced by a hollow, aching silence. The USS Thresher is gone, and with her 129 men who will never come home. It is easy, in the retelling of history, to focus on the machine, the crushed steel, the failed pipes, the physics of the implosion. But the true magnitude of the disaster is not measured in tonnage or depth. It is measured in the empty chairs at dinner tables in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and Groton, Connecticut. The loss of the Thresher remains the single deadliest submarine disaster in history, but the demographics of the dead make it particularly devastating. These were not raw recruits sent to die in a foreign war. These were the elite. The crew of a nuclear attack submarine represents the absolute pinnacle of naval training. They were engineers, mathematicians, and technicians, men chosen for their intelligence and stability. Among the 112 naval personnel were 17 civilians. This detail often escapes the history books, but it was crushing for the local community. These civilians were not distant contractors. They were neighbors. They were shipyard workers, sonar experts from local companies, and technical observers from naval laboratories. They had boarded the Thresher to ensure she was safe, to listen to the pumps and check the gauges. They were the men who had built the ship with their own hands. In Portsmouth, a town where the shipyard is the beating heart of the economy, the grief is total. Almost everyone knows someone who was on board. The local schools have children who are suddenly fatherless. The churches are full, but the prayers have changed from requests for safety to pleas for understanding. The notification process is a slow, agonizing ritual. In 1963, there is no internet, no instant news cycle. The Navy sends officers in dress uniforms to knock on doors. They carry the terrible burden of the official telegrams. For the wives of the Thresher crew, the sight of a Navy sedan pulling into the driveway becomes a nightmare image that will last a lifetime. One widow recalls waiting by the phone, hoping that the initial reports were wrong, that perhaps the submarine was just bobbing on the surface with a broken radio. When the confirmation finally comes, that the debris has been found, that there are no survivors, the hope evaporates, leaving only the cold administrative tasks of death. Memorial services are held, flags are lowered, the nation mourns, but for the families, the tragedy is just beginning. They are left with questions that no telegram can answer. Why did it happen? Could it have been prevented? To answer those questions, the United States Navy convenes a court of inquiry. It is a tribunal of the highest order, tasked with dissecting the disaster and assigning responsibility. The court meets at the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, just yards from the slipway where the Thresher was launched. The atmosphere is tense, thick with grief and defensiveness. Vice Admiral Bernard Austin presides over the court. He's a stern, no-nonsense officer who understands that the future of the entire nuclear submarine program hangs in the balance. If the Thresher was lost, due to a fundamental flaw in nuclear propulsion, the fleet might have to be grounded. If it was a Soviet attack, it could mean World War III. The court has to find the truth, no matter how ugly it might be. The inquiry calls witnesses from every level of the Navy's hierarchy. They summon the shipyard welders, the design engineers, the admirals in Washington, and the crew members of the Skylark. The testimony that unfolds over 8 weeks fills 12 volumes and spans 1,700 pages. It paints a picture of a program that was moving too fast, driven by the existential pressures of the Cold War. The primary focus quickly narrows to the silver-brazed joints. The court learns that the Thresher had over 3,000 of these connections in her high-pressure seawater systems. They hear testimony that during the construction of the Thresher and her sister ships, the inspection standards were woefully inadequate. One shipyard inspector testifies that he was pressured to approve joints that looked good enough because delaying the schedule would cost too much money. Another reveals that ultrasonic testing, the only way to truly see inside a joint, was rarely used because the equipment was scarce and the process was slow. Instead, workers often used the hammer test, tapping the pipe and listening to the ring. It was a technique better suited for 19th century plumbing than a 20th century nuclear submarine. But the inquiry also uncovers a fatal flaw in the design of the emergency systems. The court focuses intensely on the high-pressure air system, the mechanism designed to blow the water out of the ballast tanks. Witnesses testify that the air dryers were undersized and prone to failure. They reveal that moisture in the lines was a known issue, a nuisance that crews had learned to live with. The investigators run simulations. They prove that under the rapid expansion of a full emergency blow, the moist air would freeze instantly, creating ice plugs in the strainers. The system designed to save the ship would, in effect, choke itself to death. Then, the court turns its attention to the man who built the nuclear navy, Admiral Hyman G. Rickover. Rickover is a polarizing figure. He is brilliant, abrasive, and demanding. He runs the Naval Reactors Division like a personal fiefdom, insisting on absolute perfection in the nuclear propulsion plant. When he takes the stand, the room is silent. Rickover does not mince words. He deflects blame from the nuclear reactor itself, which performed exactly as designed by shutting down, and points the finger squarely at the shipyard's culture of workmanship. He argues that the Navy has become complacent. He attacks the philosophy of submarine construction, stating that the desire for high performance has outstripped the commitment to quality control. I believe the loss of the Thresher should be considered a consequence of the philosophy of design, construction, and inspection that has been permitted to obtain in our naval shipbuilding programs, Rickover states. His testimony is a blistering indictment of the industrial base. He argues that the Navy is buying advanced technology from contractors who do not understand the precision required to build it. The conflict in the inquiry room reflects the tension in the wider Navy. On one side are the operators, the men who want faster, deeper, more lethal ships. On the other side are the engineers who are now realizing that the safety margins have been eroded to the point of collapse. The court also examines the decision to rely on a single method of recovery. The Thresher had no backup way to surface if the main ballast blow failed and propulsion was lost. There were no explosive bolts to drop the keel, a feature found on some earlier research submarines. There was no way to mechanically pump the water out fast enough to overcome the flooding. Once the reactor scrammed and the pipes froze, the crew was trapped in a mathematical equation that only ended one way. In July 1963, the Court of Inquiry releases its findings. The report is a somber, technical document, but its conclusions are damning. It determines that the most probable cause of the sinking was a flooding casualty in the engine room, likely caused by a failure of a salt water piping system. This flooding shorted out the electrical panels, causing the reactor to shut down. The report concludes that the Thresher was unable to blow her main ballast tanks due to ice formation in the lines. The court finds that the Thresher was operating within her design limits, but that those limits were based on assumptions that were flawed. The safe depth was not safe if the pipes couldn't hold the pressure. The emergency blow was not an emergency system if it froze when needed. The findings exonerate Commander Harvey and his crew. The report makes it clear that no amount of skill or bravery could have saved the ship once the cascade of failures began. The men of the Thresher did not fail their ship failed them. But the report does not stop at finding the cause. It issues a series of recommendations that are sweeping in their scope. It demands a total overhaul of how the Navy builds, inspects, and operates submarines. It calls for the reinspection of every silver braze joint in the fleet. It calls for the redesign of the emergency blow system to bypass the restrictions that caused the icing. It calls for a new culture of safety. These recommendations land on the desk of the Secretary of the Navy with the force of a command. The loss of the Thresher is too great to be written off as an accident. It is a systemic indictment. The Navy realizes that if it wants to continue operating in the deep ocean, it cannot just patch the holes. It has to rebuild the foundation. For the families in Portsmouth and Groton, the release of the report brings a measure of closure, but little comfort. Knowing that a bad weld or a frozen valve killed their husbands does not bring them back. The anger is palpable. How could the Navy send men to sea in a ship that wasn't ready? How could they rely on a hammer test for a nuclear submarine? The tragedy leaves a scar on the psyche of the submarine force. The confidence of the early 1960s, the can-do spirit that believed anything was possible, is shattered. It is replaced by a grim, professional paranoia. The ocean is no longer viewed as a playground for technology, but as a hostile environment that is always trying to kill you. As 1963 draws to a close, the debris field on the bottom of the Atlantic remains silent. But in the shipyards and the design bureaus, a revolution is beginning. The name Thresher becomes a password for a new way of doing business. The Thresher syllabus, the list of changes mandated by the inquiry, begins to circulate. It is the birth of a program that will become the gold standard for engineering safety worldwide. The cost of admission was 129 lives. Now the Navy has to ensure that the purchase was worth the price. The era of experimentation is over. The era of subsafe is about to begin. The death of the USS Thresher was a trauma that fractured the soul of the United States Navy. In the months following the disaster, the grief of the families in New England slowly hardened into a rigid, unforgiving resolve within the Pentagon. The investigation had revealed a terrifying truth. The Navy's ambition had outpaced its ability to control the quality of what it built. The loss of 129 men was not just an accident. It was a warning that the entire submarine fleet was operating on borrowed time. In response, the Navy did not simply issue a memo. It launched a crusade. On December 20th, 1963, less than a year after the disaster, the Navy officially established the Submarine Safety Program, known by the acronym SubSafe. To the uninitiated, SubSafe might sound like a bureaucratic checklist. In reality, it is perhaps the most successful engineering quality assurance program in human history. It represented a fundamental shift in philosophy, moving from a culture of good enough to a culture of objective quality evidence. The core tenet of SubSafe is ruthless accountability. Before the thresher, a shipyard worker might install a valve and sign a paper saying it was done. After the thresher, that worker had to prove it. The Navy demanded a paper trail for every single critical component on a submarine. If a pipe was installed in a seawater system, the engineers needed to know exactly which mill rolled the steel, which lot number it came from, the chemical composition of the alloy, and the name of the welder who joined it. If the documentation was missing, if a piece of steel couldn't be traced back to its birth in the foundry, it was ripped out and replaced. No exceptions. The mantra became, the documentation is the material. Without the paper, the steel is just junk. The technical changes were equally drastic. The investigation had identified the silver brazed joints as the likely cause of the engine room flooding. The Navy effectively banned silver brazing for all piping systems larger than a certain diameter that were exposed to sea pressure. Instead, they switched to welding. Welding fuses the metal at the molecular level, creating a bond that is far stronger and easier to inspect with X-rays. The emergency blow system, the lifeline that had choked on ice in the thresher's final moments, was completely redesigned. The new system was built to handle the violent thermodynamics of rapid air expansion. The intricate, restrictive piping was replaced with larger, straighter paths. Dehydrators were upgraded to ensure the air was bone dry. The result was a system that could empty the ballast tanks in seconds, regardless of the depth or temperature. These changes were not applied only to new ships. The Navy ordered a massive retrofit of the existing fleet. Submarines were pulled from patrol and put into dry docks. Their hulls were cut open. Thousands of joints were inspected. Millions of dollars were spent. The operational tempo of the Cold War took a back seat to the safety of the crews. The impact of SubSafe was absolute. In the 60 years since the program was implemented, the United States Navy has not lost a single SubSafe certified submarine. While the USS Scorpion was lost in 1968, she was not fully SubSafe certified at the time of her sinking, and the cause of her loss remains a subject of debate distinct from the structural failures of the thresher. For every other boat, from the Sturgeon-class to the Los Angeles-class to the modern Virginia-class, the safety record is spotless. This safety record is the true monument to the men of the thresher. Every time a modern submarine executes an emergency blow drill, rocketing to the surface in a spray of white foam, it is using a system designed in the shadow of their sacrifice. Every time a sailor goes to sleep in his rack, hundreds of feet beneath the surface, he is protected by a hull whose integrity is guaranteed by the lessons learned in 1963. But the legacy extends beyond the mechanics of the fleet. The Thresher disaster changed the psychology of the submarine force. It instilled a deep, almost religious respect for the ocean. It taught a generation of officers that the sea is unforgiving of carelessness. The arrogance of the early atomic age, the belief that technology could conquer nature, was replaced by a quiet, professional humility. In Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and across the naval community, the memory of the Thresher is kept alive with a solemn dedication. Every year, on the anniversary of the sinking, ceremonies are held to read the names of the 129 men. The list is long, taking minutes to recite. Lieutenant Commander John Wesley Harvey, Lieutenant Commander Pat M. Garner, Chief Petty Officer Walter J. Abbey, Civilian Engineer Kenneth J. Corcoran. As each name is read, a bell is tolled. It is a reminder that these were not just ranks and rates. They were fathers who never walked their daughters down the aisle, husbands who never celebrated their anniversaries, sons who never came home for Christmas. The tragedy also fundamentally changed deep-sea exploration. The desperate search for the Thresher exposed how little the Navy knew about the deep ocean floor. It revealed the limitations of rescue technology. In the wake of the disaster, the Navy invested heavily in the Deep Submergent Systems project. This led to the development of better rescue submarines, advanced sonar mapping, and the sophisticated remote-operated vehicles, ROVs, that are used today to explore the Titanic and other wrecks. Even the site of the disaster serves a purpose. The debris field of the Thresher is monitored by the Navy to this day. Environmental samples are taken regularly to ensure the nuclear reactor, which sits somewhere in the silt, remains contained. It has become a silent laboratory, a place where the Navy studies the long-term effects of the deep ocean on man-made materials. But perhaps the most enduring legacy is the Thresher attitude. It is a mindset taught to every new recruit at the submarine school in Groton. It is the understanding that on a submarine, everyone is responsible for the safety of the ship. A single loose bolt, a single missed signature on a maintenance form, a single cut corner, any of these can be the first domino in a catastrophe. The story of the Thresher is often taught as a case study in engineering ethics. It illustrates the danger of schedule pressure, the temptation to prioritize deadlines over safety. It serves as a warning to every engineer, whether they are building bridges, spacecraft, or submarines. The laws of physics do not care about your budget or your timeline. As the decades pass, the sharp edges of the grief have softened, but the image of the Thresher remains powerful. She was the machine of tomorrow that never got to see the future. She was a victim of the Cold War's frantic pace, a casualty of a nation in a hurry. Yet, in her failure, she achieved something that success could never have bought. She forced the Navy to stop, to look in the mirror, and to decide what kind of organization it wanted to be. She forced the creation of a culture where safety is not just a slogan, but a rigid, non-negotiable discipline. Today, the United States Submarine Force is the envy of the world. It operates deeper, quieter, and safer than any other navy. This dominance is built on the keel of the Thresher. The 129 men who died on that cold April morning did not die in vain. They paid the ultimate price to write the manual on survival. Their tomb is the deep Atlantic, 8,400 feet down, in a place of eternal darkness. But their influence shines in every control room, in every shipyard, and in every home where a submariner returns safely to his family. The USS Thresher is still on patrol, not as a warship, but as a conscience. She is the permanent warning beneath the sea, whispering to every generation of sailors. Respect the depth. Trust the procedure. Never forget. The story of the USS Thresher is one of the most difficult chapters in American military history because it lacks the clarity of combat. There was no enemy to blame, no torpedo to dodge. The crew fought a battle against invisible flaws hidden within the very walls that were supposed to protect them. It is a terrifying reminder of the fragility of human endeavor when pit against the crushing forces of nature. For the families left behind, the Thresher was a tragedy without closure. There were no bodies to bury, no final goodbyes. There was only the sudden, violent silence of the ocean. The grief of Portsmouth and Groton was compounded by the knowledge that their loved ones died in the pursuit of peace, casualties of a Cold War that demanded technological perfection at a breakneck pace. However, there is a profound redemption in the legacy of the Thresher. The SubSafe program is a testament to the Navy's ability to learn from its darkest hour. It is rare in history for an organization to examine its own failures with such brutal honesty and to implement changes so sweeping that they effectively eliminate the problem forever. The fact that no subsafe certified submarine has ever been lost is a statistic bought with the lives of the Thresher crew. We remember them not just as victims of a disaster, but as the architects of a safer future. They were the pioneers who found the edge of the envelope so that others would not have to cross it. Their sacrifice ensured that thousands of other sailors could go into the deep and, more importantly, come back up. If this journey into the depths of history meant something to you, we'd be honored to have you with us again. Until next time, stay curious and take good care.